When millionaire Richard Sterling decided to live as a homeless man for 30 days, he expected to learn about poverty. He never expected his black neighbor Marcus to show him what true wealth really means. What happened next will restore your faith in humanity. Before we get into the story, let us know in the comments what's the kindest thing a stranger has ever done for you. Richard Sterling had everything money could buy. A mansion in the hills, 3 luxury cars, and a bank account that could fund small countries. But at 42, something was missing. The tech entrepreneur had built his empire from scratch, but somewhere along the way, he'd lost touch with the world outside his gilded cage. It started with a conversation at a charity gala. "You rich folks throw money at problems but never really understand them," said Dr. Sarah Chen, a social worker who ran a homeless shelter. Her words stung because they rang true. Richard donated millions to causes he'd never personally experienced. That night, staring at his reflection in his marble bathroom, Richard made a decision that would change everything. He would spend 30 days living as a homeless person, documenting the experience to better understand poverty and maybe find some perspective on his own life. Richard's plan was simple but radical. He would leave his mansion, his credit cards, his phone, and his identity behind. He'd crafted a new persona, Robert Sterling, a man who'd lost everything and ended up on the streets. He even grew out his beard and bought worn-out clothes from a thrift store. The first night was brutal. Richard had chosen a spot under a bridge 3 miles from his mansion, close enough to observe, but far enough to remain anonymous. The concrete was cold, the sounds of the city were different down here, and every muscle in his body ached from the hard ground. But it was the looks that hurt the most, the way people's eyes slid past him as if he were invisible, the way mothers pulled their children closer, the way business people quickened their pace. Richard had never felt so alone in his life. On day 3, everything changed. Richard was sitting outside a small corner store holding a cardboard sign that read, "Anything helps, God bless." His stomach growled. He'd eaten nothing but a stale sandwich in 2 days. His pride had kept him from actually asking for help, but desperation was setting in. That's when he saw him. Marcus Johnson was walking out of the store, a tall black man in his 50s with kind eyes and work-worn hands. He wore a mechanic's uniform with Marcus embroidered on the pocket and carried a bag of groceries. Their eyes met briefly, and Marcus paused. "You okay there, brother?" Marcus asked, his voice warm with genuine concern. Richard nodded, not trusting his voice. Marcus studied him for a moment, then reached into his bag and pulled out a banana and a bottle of water. "Here," Marcus said, extending the items. "You look like you could use this." Richard's hands trembled as he accepted the gift. "Thank you," he whispered. Marcus smiled. "We all need help sometimes. You take care of yourself, okay?" As Marcus walked away, Richard felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the kindness of a stranger who expected nothing in return. He devoured the banana and drank the water slowly, savoring both the nourishment and the human connection. The next day, Richard was back at the same spot, partly because he'd claimed it as his territory, but mostly because he hoped to see Marcus again. He didn't have to wait long. Marcus appeared around noon, carrying a brown paper bag. "Thought you might be hungry," he said, handing Richard a sandwich wrapped in aluminum foil. "My wife Denise makes the best turkey sandwiches in the city." Richard unwrapped the sandwich with reverence. It was thick with meat, fresh lettuce and tomatoes. After the first bite, he said, "This is incredible. Please thank your wife for me." Marcus sat down beside him on the concrete. "Name's Marcus," he said. "What's yours?" "Robert," Richard replied, sticking to his cover story. "Well, Robert, you seem like a good man who's hit some hard times. We've all been there." Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus became a daily fixture in Richard's life. Every day around noon, Marcus would appear with food, water, and something even more precious, conversation. He'd sit with Richard for 20 or 30 minutes, sharing stories about his work at the auto shop, his wife's community garden, and his daughter who was studying to become a nurse. Richard found himself looking forward to these visits more than anything else. Marcus never asked invasive questions about his past or offered unsolicited advice. He simply treated Richard like a human being worthy of respect and friendship. "You know," Marcus said one afternoon, sharing a bag of chips with Richard, "I used to think homeless folks were just lazy or addicted. Shameful, really. But my pastor taught me something. Everyone's got a story, and everyone deserves dignity." Richard nodded, guilt eating at him. Here was a man who worked 60-hour weeks as a mechanic, who had every reason to walk past a homeless person, yet he stopped every day to show kindness to a stranger.
"What changed your mind?" Richard asked. Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Lost my job about 5 years ago. Economy was tough, and the shop I worked at went under. We almost lost our house. Denise worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat, and I felt like a failure. Sometimes I'd sit in my car and just cry, you know? Felt like I was one step away from being where you are now." Richard's throat tightened. "I'm sorry, man." "Don't be," Marcus said. "It taught you something important. The line between having a roof over your head and sleeping under the stars is thinner than most people think. Could happen to anyone." As the days passed, Richard witnessed Marcus's kindness extend far beyond their daily visits. He saw Marcus give his jacket to an elderly homeless woman during a cold snap. He watched him bring groceries to Mrs. Patterson, an elderly neighbor who rarely left her apartment. He observed Marcus tutoring kids in the neighborhood for free after work. But it was the conversation with Marcus's wife that really opened Richard's eyes. On day 18, Marcus arrived with his wife Denise, a petite woman with graying hair and a smile that could light up a room. She carried a thermos of hot soup and a genuine concern for Richard's well-being. "Marcus talks about you all the time," she said, ladling soup into a cup. "He says you're good people, just going through a rough patch." "Your husband is a saint," Richard said, accepting the soup gratefully. Denise laughed. "He's just a man who believes in doing right by others. We don't have much, but we have enough to share." "We don't have much." The words echoed in Richard's mind. He'd observed Marcus's life over the past weeks. The man drove a 15-year-old Honda, wore the same work uniform every day, and lived in a modest apartment. Yet he shared his food daily with a stranger, never missing a day, never making excuses. That night, lying under his cardboard shelter, Richard couldn't sleep. He thought about his mansion, his investment portfolio, his expensive cars gathering dust. He had everything, yet he was miserable. Marcus had little by society standards, yet he radiated a contentment and purpose that Richard had never experienced. Day 21 brought a crisis that would change everything. Richard was sitting in his usual spot when Marcus appeared, but something was different. His shoulders were slumped, his usual smile absent. He sat down heavily beside Richard without his usual greeting. "You're okay, brother?" Richard asked. Marcus sighed deeply. "Remember I told you about my daughter Jessica? She's in nursing school?" Richard nodded. "She got accepted to a special program. It's her dream, pediatric nursing. But it costs $15,000 that we just don't have. We've been saving for years, but—" Marcus trailed off, staring at his hands. "What are you going to do?" Richard asked, though his mind was already racing with possibilities. "I don't know," Marcus admitted. "I've been working double shifts. Denise took on extra cleaning jobs, but it's not enough. The program starts in 6 weeks, and without the money—" he shrugged helplessly. Richard's heart broke. Here was a man who had shown him more kindness than anyone in his privileged life, and he was watching his daughter's dreams crumble for want of money that Richard could provide without thinking twice. "I'm sure you'll figure something out," Richard said weakly, hating himself for the inadequate response. Marcus stood up, handed Richard a sandwich, and managed to smile. "Thanks for listening, Robert. Sometimes it helps just to talk about it." That night, Richard made a decision. He couldn't continue this charade while Marcus suffered, but he also couldn't simply reveal his identity and throw money at the problem. Marcus was too proud for that, and it would feel like pity rather than genuine help. Richard spent the next 3 days formulating a plan. He would reveal his identity, but he would also offer Marcus something more valuable than money, a partnership. On day 25, Richard asked Marcus to meet him at a nearby cafe instead of their usual spot. Marcus looked surprised, but agreed. "There's something I need to tell you," Richard began, his heart pounding. "My name isn't Robert Sterling. It's Richard Sterling." Marcus frowned. "Okay, why did you lie?"
Richard took a deep breath and told the whole story. His wealth, his disconnect from reality, his decision to live homeless for 30 days, and most importantly, how Marcus's kindness had changed his entire perspective on life. Marcus sat in stunned silence for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. "So you've been pretending this whole time?" "I was pretending to be homeless," Richard said, "but everything else was real. Your kindness, our friendship, the way you treated me with dignity when everyone else looked through me. That changed me, Marcus. You showed me what real wealth looks like." Marcus stood up abruptly. "I need to think about this." He walked away, leaving Richard alone with his guilt and fear. For 3 days, Marcus didn't come by. Richard continued his homeless routine, but now it felt hollow. He'd lost the one genuine relationship he'd formed, and he understood why. Marcus felt betrayed, used, and probably embarrassed. On day 28, Marcus appeared again, but his demeanor was different. He sat down beside Richard without offering food or water. "I was angry," Marcus said simply. "Felt like you were studying me, like some kind of experiment." "I understand," Richard replied. "But Marcus, you have to know. What you did for me, it wasn't about the experiment. You saw someone in need and helped, no questions asked. That's who you are." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I want to help Jessica with her nursing program, but not as charity. I want to offer you a partnership." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What kind of partnership?" "I've been looking for someone to run a community outreach program from my company. Someone who understands people, who has genuine compassion, who can identify real needs and address them effectively. The salary would be $90,000 a year, plus benefits, plus a budget to actually help people." Marcus stared at him. "You're serious?" "Dead serious. I've watched you for weeks, Marcus. You're not just kind, you're a natural leader, a problem solver, someone people trust. I need that in my organization. And Jessica's program? Would be covered as part of your employment package, education benefits for employees' children." Marcus was quiet for a long time. "This feels like charity with extra steps." "It's not," Richard said firmly. "I'm offering you a job because you're the best person for it. Yes, I want to help Jessica, but I also need someone like you in my company, someone who can teach me and my employees what you've taught me, which is that real wealth isn't about money. It's about connection, compassion, and community. You've got more of that than anyone I've ever met." Marcus studied Richard's face. "If I say yes, I have conditions." "Name them." "First, I finish my 30 days at the auto shop. I don't leave my boss hanging." "Agreed." "Second, this program we build, it's not about making your company look good, it's about actually helping people." "Absolutely." "Third, I want to meet your wife, your family, the real you. If we're going to work together, I need to know who I'm dealing with." Richard smiled. "I'd like that. But Marcus, I should tell you, I don't have a wife or family. That's part of what was missing from my life." "Well," Marcus said, extending his hand, "looks like you've got a lot to learn about what really matters." The transformation that followed was remarkable. Marcus took the job and immediately began revolutionizing Richard's approach to community involvement. Instead of writing checks to distant charities, they created programs that addressed local needs directly. They opened a job training center in Marcus's neighborhood, funded by Richard's company, but run by Marcus and other community members. They started a scholarship program for nursing students, administered by healthcare professionals who understood the field's needs. And most importantly, They created a mentorship program where successful business people would spend time with homeless individuals, not as charity cases, but as fellow human beings with stories and potential. Jessica got into her nursing program and excelled, but more than that, she became an advocate for healthcare access in underserved communities. Marcus's wife Denise started a community garden that provided fresh produce for local families and became a gathering place for neighbors. Richard moved out of his mansion and into a modest home in Marcus's neighborhood. He discovered that he preferred barbecues with neighbors to galas with strangers, that helping someone find a job was more satisfying than any business deal he'd ever closed. 6 months later, Richard was walking through the same neighborhood where he'd spent those 30 days. He stopped at the corner store where he'd first met Marcus, now transformed into a community resource center. "You know what I realized?" Marcus said, joining him outside the center. "You didn't just pretend to be homeless for 30 days. You pretended to be rich for 30 years. Richard laughed. "I might be right about that. The real you, the one I met on the street, that's who you were meant to be. Someone who cares more about people than profits." As they watched children play in the community garden, elderly neighbors sharing stories on new benches, and formerly homeless individuals heading to work in jobs that they'd helped them find, Richard understood that Marcus was right. He'd spent 30 days learning about poverty, but he'd spent his whole life impoverished in ways that had nothing to do with money. Marcus had shown him that true wealth was measured not in dollars, but in the lives you touch, the community you build, and the love you share. The experiment had ended, but the transformation was just beginning. Richard had pretended to be homeless and discovered that he'd been homeless all along. Homeless in his heart, disconnected from the human community that gives life meaning. Thanks to Marcus's kindness, he'd finally found his way home. What did you think of Richard and Marcus's story? Share your thoughts in the comments and tell us about a time when kindness changed your life. And don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring tales.